Hi everybody, welcome back. Here with me are Maria Ressa, a journalist and the CEO of news site Rappler, and Rene DeResta, the research manager at the Stanford Internet Observatory. Both are experts in and witnesses of how narratives that spread on media platforms are having serious impacts both online and off. Welcome, guys. Rene,
Thanks for having us.
very nice to see you again. How's the little one?
Oh, she's great.
Good, excellent, and no doubt you're so busy. Every time
Consoled.
so busy, and Maria, this is the first time that we've met. But the two of you have so much responsibility and so much going on in your lives. How are you? Are you? How has this last year been?
At least for me, on June 15th, in the middle of the lockdown in the Philippines, it's the longest in the world and among the strictest. But in the middle of that, I was convicted of cyber libel. It's for a crime that didn't exist when we published the story 8 years ago, a story I didn't write, edit, or supervise. And now I could go to jail for up to 6 years. So having said all of that, yes, I have 8 arrest warrants. I am fighting each case in court, and connected to what you're saying, all of these, the weaponization of the law was actually enabled by the bottom-up attacks on social media that began in 2016. And that's progressed, and we've seen the evolution. So having said that, it's good. Why? Because we just breathe it in like polluted air, and we find the way to fight back, right?
Yeah. I mean, you sort of took the words right out of my mouth, Maria. You are a recognised advocate for the freedom of press, which is absolutely critical and vital to everyone all over the world. And this summer, as you said, a Manila court found you guilty of cyber libel, a charge that your teams argue was meant to silence you from exposing corruption in the Philippines, which you just touched on there. What changes have you seen, Maria, in how the news industry sees and carries out its duty to inform all of us?
We have never been under such intense attack. So by next year, I'll have been a journalist for 35 years, right? I've worked in conflict areas. I've led teams in war zones. And at least in those areas, if the shooting is coming from here, how to protect yourself. In this environment, it's far more insidious, and the tactics are the same globally, and it is enabled by technology. So, in our case in the Philippines, exponential attacks on social media, bottom up, a lie told a million times becomes a fact. That began happening in 2016, so 4 years ago. And in 2016, they seeded the narrative, journalist equals criminal. 2017, you have President Duterte himself saying the same thing top down in his State of the Nation address. In 2018, the weaponization of the law happened, 11 cases filed against us. 2019, I had 8 arrest warrants. I was arrested twice in a 5-week period. And 2020, I was convicted in one of the first cases. So journalist equals criminal. The world is turned upside down. I guess my main concern is this. I think journalists around the world have done our jobs. We have held the line. We are telling you the facts, because without facts, you can't have truth. Without this, you can't have trust. Without any of these, democracy as we know it is dead. And I have been saying that for 4 years. I think the last part is, with elections coming up in the United States, without facts, how can you have integrity of elections? With this kind of insidious manipulation that's happening online, how can voters choose, right? How can we know that this is the will of the people? I mean, these are huge issues, right? And I think we need a global collective to try to deal with this.
It's a war of information, right? One of which you've both been warning of for 5 years, more?
It's really, I became a journalist because I knew information is power, and I wanted to fight for justice. We shine the light. That's the mission of journalism. This time shows you more than at any other time that information really is power. And what happened, what triggered it, is news groups lost our gatekeeping powers to technology, and technology abdicated responsibility for protecting the public sphere.
Beautifully said. Worrying, but beautifully said. Renee, sort of switching to you for a second. First, it's really nice to see you again after our first little meeting last month. But your work is also so impressive and so needed as well, as is your remarkable career of all the places where you've worked, all the places that you've been, and all the experience that you've gained from that as well. You don't just dig deep; you dig the deepest, as far as I can tell. And in most cases, into the really unpleasant areas, which most other people certainly don't have to go to. But on that, thank you for what you do. Thank you to both of you for what you do. But this is really critical work that you're both doing. But Renee, you've informed policymakers, civil society leaders, academic institutions, and so many more. How have online platforms, and by extension some news outlets, enabled the spread of misinformation or propaganda?
Yeah, so as Maria was describing this bottom-up activism, originally social platforms were a way for people to connect with each other. And there was an explosion in extraordinary social movements that came about as a result of that in the early days, right? And so we don't want to imply that that act of connecting people or that act of democratizing access, the ability to create content, the ability to disseminate it, the ability to bypass gatekeepers, candidly, to make your voice heard, particularly if you were a member of a community that didn't have access to press. This was a global phenomenon that happened on social platforms that they really enabled. But the downside of that, the unintended consequence, is when you connect everybody and when you make it possible for information to spread instantaneously, not everybody who is endowed with that power uses it responsibly. And so what you see is fake people begin to participate in the conversation. Fake media properties begin to spring up. Because as Maria mentioned, this is a tool of power. And if you can control the narrative and if you can dominate the share of voice, then you can achieve real world objectives. For a while, people talked about the internet or social platforms as this thing that happened over there. Yeah, there were conspiracy theories, but that was just on the internet. Yes, there was some, kind of wild claims and harassment, hate speech, et cetera, but that was just on the internet. Then we began to realize the extent to which what was happening online and offline, the tools of influence, the democratization of the ability to influence, and candidly, the democratization of propaganda meant that ordinary people could have a profound impact in shaping the direction of leadership, the direction of policy, and the direction that their country was going. I
think we all agree media is a huge responsibility and it is a huge power, and it's a privilege. But the moment that it gets taken out of responsible hands, then you have sort of uncharted territory, chaos, one might describe it as.
I think that's accurate. And I think a lot of where we are today is thinking about, we have a brand new information environment. It's only about 10 years old or so, the social web. And whereas whenever there's a new technological tool for the dissemination of information or propaganda, there was kind of like a period of social upheaval while the world, while societies kind of began to understand how they could use it, what it was for, and where regulators began to think about how they would address it. And I think that we're in that pivotal period right now, trying to understand how to take the good and minimize the chaos, if you will, and achieve an environment where people do have that freedom of expression, that ability to connect without some of the unintended downstream harms that we've seen manifest as a result.
And what is the real effect of misinformation? What is it actually doing to us? To either of you. Maria, perhaps you go first.
Well, can I quickly, I think Renee is nicer than I am in this one, right? And I will say this because I'm living through it. I really am, and I can compare it over 35 years. So what you call chaos, look, when news organizations were the gatekeepers, we had standards and ethics, values. Yeah. We were legally liable, right? So we protected the facts. But what happened when technology took over is that they took the platforms and they didn't realize it, as Rene said, unintended consequences. But what they did is something journalists have never done, which is to willfully manipulate people, to use neuroscience to build in, it's called optimizing growth and engagement. And I really hate the word engagement now, the way tech uses it, but they build it in. So what they do is they figure out the way we think, and then really just gleefully figure out that, okay, well, these are the worst parts of human nature. Let's not just influence, let's take their data. So on every social media platform, we put in our data. It is atomized. Machine learning takes it and builds a model of each of us. It knows us more intimately than we know ourselves. And then that model is pulled up by artificial intelligence into this pool where, let's just say, a company or a country has a message, and the artificial intelligence will give the most vulnerable moment you have to a message, and to the highest bidder, sell it, and you are nudged. It's a feedback loop. When you're nudged, you can take the nudge or you cannot. But either way, whatever action you take goes right back into the machine. I'm sorry, so geeky about it. And I know Rene knows as much about this because this has been years-long conversations we've had. I think the reality now is that the world is at a precipice. I am paying the price for Silicon Valley's decisions, and there has to be accountability. We are fighting impunity in the Philippines, not just of our government that is killing people, the drug war. Our human rights groups say it's at least 27,000 people killed since last December. But we're also challenging the impunity of the platforms. Facebook in particular, 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. Facebook is our internet. And you could say that Rodrigo Duterte and Mark Zuckerberg are on the same page as far as the threats to us are concerned.
Okay, so in your experience and with all your connections, who are the leaders in preventing the spread of misinformation? Which people, which organizations need a light shone on them right now?
This is what's happening. Rene said it. It's creative destruction. I think we all have to accept that the world as we knew it is dead. And, in the same way, this year is the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima, Nagasaki. What happened? The entire world came together, and we came up with Bretton Woods, with NATO, with the UN Declaration of Human Rights. This is another one of those pivotal moments. Data is not oil, it is plutonium. And I'm paraphrasing Jim Balsillie, who is the CEO of the company that did BlackBerry. He chose a business model that wasn't extractive of our behavior, right? So if it's plutonium and an atom bomb went off, Prince Harry, what would you do, right? This is, I guess, I'm saying we all have a stake in this. Every American going into elections, you can't just think voting is enough. You're going to have to sit and ask yourself the same question I asked myself, which is, what will you sacrifice for the truth? What will you sacrifice for the facts? And in our case, we're really called on to sacrifice a lot.
And Rene, what is the way that these platforms, by what I'm hearing you say, is the way that these platforms have almost hijacked media, news, privilege, power, all of that. What is that doing to news organizations? Is there? There's obviously a huge commercial incentive here based on almost industrializing news.
Well, in the States, we've seen an extraordinary fragmentation of media. We see, it's interesting. All major media properties have presences on social media as well, where they kind of participate in that battle for attention. You see headlines that are much more sensational, the actual substance of the article. A lot of the time that's because they're competing. Nobody is going, it's not like you pick up the newspaper, you're going to read it in its, its paper form in its entirety. Or even, people used to go to NewYorkTimes.com, Fox.com, CNN.com. Now people see what is curated for them. I think actually it's the combination of how the information is delivered to us in particular. Maria refers to some of the targeting, advertising targeting, incentives, and engagement. a lot of the ways that we see information is no longer a holistic view of the world by looking at the entirety of all of the, coverage of a particular topic, even within one publication. We don't have that perspective. What we see are the things that are curated for us, which means that the feed, which is algorithmically ranking hierarchically what we are most likely to be receptive to or want to pay attention to. Based on, again, each of the platforms being roughly in competition with each other for our time and our attention. So that dynamic is very real. It is informed by the business model. I think where we are today with news in particular, though, as people, when there is a sense of crisis, which is since March, in the United States, there's been a constant sense of crisis. It's only increasing as we had these last 3 weeks into the election. People gather on social platforms, and they're there because they want to talk to their communities while consuming the news. So this is, this kind of marriage of entertainment, social, and information all being in the same place. And so the net effect of that is that they are seeing what is shared by their friends in their communities. So occasionally that means, in a lot of cases, you'll have a very kind of narrow, bubbly type view of what's happening in the world. But more than that, there's a constant desire for immediacy, for knowing the truth instantaneously. And that's not how reputable news works. And so there's this demand for every time I refresh my phone, there has to be some new information. I have to learn something new. During COVID, it was, what are the treatments? What are the cures? What's going to happen to my family? Now, as we head into the election, it's, what is the latest crazy story in the campaign? People expect reputable information instantaneously. And that is, those two things are in tension. And I don't think that we have an effective way to resolve that in our curation or amplification structures at this point.
Maria, that must, as a journalist, that must be incredibly hard, because there's this competition that's now being created, where you have to get something online first, and if you don't, then you lose out by however many millions of clicks, and then commercially you lose out as well. But then surely the pressure that's coming from above to get that story online as quickly as possible, all of a sudden the importance of facts is sort of pushed to the side. So invariably there's this struggle, this whatever you want to call it, to try and to get the story first. And even if there isn't a story, 24-hour news cycle, you got to fill the space. So you got to create the news.
But Harry, I would go one step further than that. I think that was the case in 2014, in 2015, when we were getting the rush to digitalization, when news was moving online. Rappler is a startup. We began it online in 2012, and we embraced Facebook. I'm just going to rephrase something Renee said, which is, think about it. This is the way I'm living through it, right? Meaning has been atomized. So everything a journalist does is torn apart into bits and pieces. And then it is the algorithm of delivery platforms, of social media, that decides the context for the sentences you write. So we're no longer in charge of context or meaning, right? And that is the problem, because when you have a democracy and an algorithm that is meant to exploit your weaknesses to keep you on the platform, when that is what determines the context of the messages you live, the messages that give meaning to your world, you're really reduced to meaninglessness. And then aside from that, the designs of the platforms themselves actually encourage us against them, right? In the Philippines, we saw ourselves, like, if you're pro-Duterte, and you can use this for pro-Trump or anti-Trump. In 2016, in order to grow the social media platforms, they recommend friends of friends. Every single social media platform uses that. And if you do that, in 2016, the pro-Duterte people grew and they moved further right. The anti-Duterte people grew their platforms and they moved further left. And it went and it went. And what's being torn apart here is the public sphere. That's why we have no shared facts. So what does that mean? No meaning, no context, or the context that is provided by an algorithm that is opaque at best. We have no idea how it's manipulating us. And then I think
the context stripped away, right? The context stripped. Because of social media, I don't know how many characters you're allowed on most of these things, but of course it's going to anger people. Of course it's going to cause divisiveness, because what should be a story with context about this long gets shrunk down into one sentence or three sentences, and it enrages people because they're making opinions or decisions based on that instant hit, as opposed to what the younger generation seem to be doing, which is, I've seen something somewhere, I'm going to fact check that, I'm going to go over here, okay, and I'm going to go to somewhere else. So if you have 2 or 3 different areas to be able to compare it with, then great. But if you're just on one social media platform and you are unaware of your habits being learnt by the device, you're creating your own echo chamber, of which feels great, and you're creating your own reality. And therefore, once again, it is impossible to be able to have an argument or a discussion with somebody else, because you are adamant that you are right because you've seen it on all of your news feeds, but those news feeds have been created for you.
So it feeds into your cognitive bias. But I'll say one last thing on this, which is that the platforms actually spread lies laced with anger and hate faster and further than really boring facts. Journalists spend lifetimes learning how to tell stories so that you care. But we don't stand a chance in these delivery platforms. So I get emotional again. So this is the problem. Anger and hate is part of it. The manipulation of our emotions is part of it. And what you talked about is a thinking slow process. Journalism is a thinking slow process that is trying to be distributed on a thinking fast platform. We are going to lose, which is why we have to demand enlightened self-interest from Silicon Valley. Renee, go for it.
Well, look, it's a group effort, and I and everybody else watching this can't thank you guys enough for all of the work that you continue to do, the research, the endless content that you have to go through to be able to find the truth or to be able to stop more of this from happening. But there's been quite a heavy subject for people to take on. So, in short, to end with, some optimism, some hope. These are global platforms that have an ability or have connected people all around the world. So presumably handled the right way or managed the right way, and algorithms were built by humans. So this idea that it can't be changed or it's now completely out of control, one would hope is actually false. Something can be done about this, and then we have a world that is connected for all the right reasons. So starting with you, Renee, and then moving on to Maria. What is that last piece of optimism and hope that you would leave everybody watching this now?
I think that really it's actually it's the civil society and researchers and government and the cooperation that we've built over the last few years, leading into 2020 in particular, but since 2016. I think that, Maria is absolutely right. There is not accountability in the way that we need it to be. It's just not there yet. In the US in particular, I know this is the optimism part, so I don't want to be too negative, but the very idea of a fact check is partisan now. It is perceived as censorship by vast swaths of the population. If somebody tells you what you've said is wrong, that is censoring your opinion, right? And that is where we are. I think that one of the things that we try to do at Stanford is we do try to work with the platforms so that we can make constructive suggestions, so that at least in the near term, we have a little bit more in the way of positive outcomes, particularly with these, pick whatever the next crisis is. I think on the optimism front, though, we are also seeing so much awareness from the public, which is demanding accountability, but more than that, which is recognizing that they also have some agency, not a ton, not as much as they need, but enough, I think, at this point where we're starting to see media literacy and efforts, as you mentioned, from the younger generation, where they are doing that lateral searching, really making an effort to try to find out what's true by looking at, in a kind of plethora of places on the internet. And I think that as we continue to develop those programs and, the younger generation kind of continues to take over, we're headed in the right direction.
On my end, Harry, Rappler started in 2012, and we had 3 pillars: technology, journalism, community. And now I can't give up because we're going to fight. And that is where the global battle should begin. Tech, demand accountability, demand regulations, demand enlightened self-interest. The second is journalism. We keep doing our jobs. Facts are incredibly important. And for the international community, help news groups survive this time period, right? And that's part of the initiative we have with BBC Media Action and Luminate to try to get a fund of $1 billion annually to help independent media survive. And then the third, which is what Renee said, community. Civil society has to come together and we have to feed them facts. These are all connected. This is the reason why I liked joining the real Facebook oversight board, because they're very strong civil rights activists there, very strong academics and journalists. Our battle is combined. We are the tripods of democracy.
I mean, beautifully said by both of you. Thank you to both of you for giving up your time to speak to me and to speak to us. As I said before, the work you're doing is incredible, and so many people don't know what you do on a day-to-day basis. So thank you. Good luck with everything. Keep smiling, especially you, Maria. I love the energy. And yeah, look after yourselves, and no doubt we'll speak soon.